Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pitts. This is Ukraine War News Update, first part there for the 23rd of March 2024, third time lucky. Sorry this is a little bit late, my kid had to play football, he won his game, so happy days. That's why I'm a little bit late. The Ukrainian General Staff figures are as follows. These are what the Ukrainians claim of the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, you can find them in the description to the video below. 1,050 personnel loss, that's above 1,000 again. We've had a number of days where the figures have dropped in certain categories. Now that's shot back up again. That's a big loss for the Russians. 12 tanks, even though that's not the biggest loss day, a day of losses in terms of tanks. 12 tanks to lose 12 tanks in a day is a bit of an issue. 19 armor personnel vehicles, slightly above average. 36 artillery systems, very much above average. So a heavy day of losses in that category. Then 57 vehicles and fuel tanks, very heavy. And 19 pieces of special equipment, possibly the biggest number in that category to date. That is possibly as a result of excavators. I think there's a montage of excavators getting hit, and that could be as a result of that. So yeah, some fairly challenging statistics there for the Russians. Of course, the Ukrainians might well have lost heavily as well. We don't know, but the official stats here are pretty good for the Ukrainians. Andrew Perpetu is working really hard at the moment and possibly needs his sleep a bit more than most people, the amount that he's working. And he has not got out the stats for the Russian and Ukrainian losses for the day before, so we'll have to do without them for today's video. There is some evidence that the first rack has been lost. You might ask what a rack is. 120mm self-propelled mortar. There's video evidence of that being lost, and that's the first one. These are provided by the Ukrainians. Let's just make sure, no music on there. Here you go. So looks like it's not long for this world, that one. So that good thing about Wikipedia, when you go to individual military equipment pages, usually at the bottom it tells you who uses them, and in the context of the Ukraine war, it should tell you if Ukraine uses them, how many they've been given. So here you say operators Poland, and then Ukraine, at least 24 vehicles were pledged by the Polish in March 2023. So they have at least 24 of these. One would assume one of those has finally been taken out by the Russians. Then when we go to look at another war vehicle tracker video, unfortunately, there's quite a few bits of high-value kit that the Russians are taking out at the moment of the Ukrainians, and war vehicle trackers catching them. Oh man, Russians supposedly destroyed another NASAMS launcher near Privolnoye in Zaporizhia Oblast. I don't know whether that's one that's been brought to the front line near Zaporizhia, like in the Oblast, or one that's near the city of Zaporizhia, or somewhere else. So it could be one that's protecting, being more defensive, or it could be one that's being offensive. There is a geolocation there, but I haven't checked it out yet, sorry. This is a second known destruction as such, and the strong fire and secondary explosions indicate it's not a decoy. That's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. They do have a few NASAMS, but they are really high value pieces of kit. And if you have one destroyed that's doing a job in a certain area, then you might have to pull one from somewhere else. And again, what does that say about your networks? You don't have a lot of... You're not really going to have any reserves for something like this, right? It's not like you've got 6 sitting in a warehouse waiting, to be put in place while, just in case you need it. Everything is out. It's like being at a shop. Everything's out on the shelf, mate. We've got nothing in the warehouse. Everything's on the shop, on the shop shelf. So here, they won't be able to just replace a NASAMS like that, and this is why they're consistently asking for air defenses. They will be an attrition of even high value air defense systems, and that means that there's going to have to be this consistent provision of such pieces of equipment to Ukraine. Right, moving on. Just a little analysis about the Desert Cross 1003 here, because this is a piece of kit that I keep asking the question: are the Russians losing lots of these golf carts because they're using them as a bit of kit that is the right bit of kit to use in that particular situation? Maybe it's like they're light, that you can fire out of all directions from them, etc., etc. Or are they using them and losing them because they're the wrong bit of kit and actually it's all they can use? They're running out of BMPs or they're running out of whatever. And I don't know. I leave that the answer to that open. Special Curse on Cat here says, as many sources have already written, Russians began to use the Desert Cross 1000-3 much more often on the front line. Now some tactics of their use by the Russians in assaults have begun to become clear. A Russian unit consisting of 5 to 8 infantrymen on each golf cart moves on to the front line, after which they abandon the golf cart and are expected to take and hold positions. The 47th Brigade shows a destruction of one such group on the Avdiivka front. Quote, Russian special forces that drove into Berdichi on a Chinese golf cart. At first, they even shot down our drone with an assault rifle. Then they used smoke cover like in cool action movies and ran to hide. 4 hid in the remains of the building foundation, 1 lay down in the crater, and 2 hid under destroyed equipment. Okay, this still doesn't really answer whether they are using these because they have no option. Because what would traditionally happen, you know what I mean, is an APC or an IFV would drive up, drop those troops off, give some covering fire, and then jog on and get out of there to pick some more troops up. But it looks like, well, at least according to this source, that the Russians are kind of using them in a disposable way. You drive up to the position you want to hold, and you offload and you just leave the buggy there. But then, of course, it can just get taken out by drones and whatnot. So I don't know. Still don't know the answer to that question. Right, I've been having this discussion with Greg Terry. So Greg has spoken to, say, the commander in Chasiv Yar, who says, yeah, Russians have got way more drones than us. And so Greg's of the opinion that the Russians have more drones and are using more drones than the Ukrainians. And I have this slightly big picture view where I've been looking at all the data that Tochny have been presenting, and Andrew Perpetua's been collecting, and then you start looking at all these other claims as well. And my opinion is that it's localized, where one side has the advantage over the other, and right across the whole front line that will be different in different places. So Krinky, the Ukrainians appear to have drone advantage, as according to all the Russians complaining about that. Which Chasiv Yar, it could be that the Ukrainians are complaining about the Russian advantage. But the other thing you got to recognize is that when one side complains, and I watched a video last night of someone in Chasiv Yar, stuck in Chasiv Yar, saying they are buzzing everywhere. You can hear them. There are drones everywhere. And the implication was that the Russians have just shed loads of drones everywhere. But of course, that doesn't tell you that even in that same place, whether the Russians are also experiencing that same thing. So have you got people holed up in a Russian house going, there are drones everywhere, we can't move, we need drone jammers, blah, blah, blah. And my guess is that both sides are experiencing the horrific reality of there being just an incredible amount of drone usage and drones in the air. And if you ask the soldiers on the front line who's got the most drones, they'll probably say, well, the enemy has, because it's hell. But actually, both sides are probably experiencing that to a certain degree. And I've seen so much footage to suggest pretty much that. I mean, both sides are just using insanely a lot. But also, you can't argue with the verified footage. The only thing you can say is there's maybe a selection bias or something. But the Russians apparently they will release everything that they can to do with Ukrainian destruction, Ukrainian stuff. And so there is the idea. I spoke to the Tochny guys to say, well, look, is this a selection bias? And they're like, no, not as far as we can work out. And Andrew Perpetua trawls more Russian sources than Ukrainian to make sure he's not getting some kind of bias. So when you are seeing that the Russians are losing phenomenal amounts of equipment compared to the Ukrainians, then you can but surmise that the Ukrainians are destroying more Russian vehicles than the Russians are Ukrainians with drones. And then the footage also suggests that with infantry, but now with positions and buildings and trenches where the Ukrainians did have the disadvantage. Apparently, according to the statistics, they now have the advantage. So, Greg and I may disagree there, but I would stand by my conclusion that the Ukrainians have now got the advantage in all categories, but that can change, and it's not the same everywhere on the front line. And here's an example of something that the Russians used to do a lot more, but now the Ukrainians are doing. And this is where we've seen one of the shifts. So previously, the Russians had quite an advantage of hitting positions, as in buildings, and the Ukrainians didn't use drones to do that so much. But this video is a classic example of a large building, getting absolutely just consistently hammered by a number of drones. So on the left bank, Ukrainian Marines found a hideout used by Russians as an FPV operating base. The base was dismantled. And what you see drones going into windows, then going into areas where the drones have already been, then other drones going in and hitting other positions and different angles. And this one building just to show you there, that is, I think, predominantly done by drones. I think it was some artillery fire going on as well, but actually you can see one of the drones that goes in, the whole roof, like there's dust comes out the whole roof. In other words, these drones have significant explosive capabilities. So this is a big building that it's bigger than this building you can see on the right there. It's a base for the Russians, and it gets hammered by repeated drone attacks to the point where there's no building left really. So my point and you can go and watch the video at your leisure, but all these should be linked in the description below. But I just think this is such an important aspect of the war, and if one side can get the advantage over the other, that leads to significant advantage in general. And the drones, this war has shown itself to be a war of drones, both long distance, medium distance and short distance drones, the different capabilities, how they are used. And I think at the moment, and if the stats are going to carry on for March, this will look like a good month for the Ukrainians in terms of having a drone advantage across all the categories, including thermal drones, which is very significant. But as mentioned, that won't be the same everywhere. Okay, going on to distant strikes. Overnight, Russia launched 34 drones, Shahed drones, into Ukraine. A total of 31 of them were shot down, so that's a really good interception rate. And that's another significant wave after last night's wave of missiles and drones. Also, Kharkiv was hit with a double tap. I'm not sure what with, probably S-300. A communal facility was hit. The roof was on fire in a 3-story building. A local man was injured. Then the second hit, injuring one firefighter plus emergency vehicles. This is what the Russians are doing, just consistently doing double taps and attacking places that don't appear to have too much military significance. Okay, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, that is, says Russian oil refineries are legitimate targets. So there's this whole argument about the pressure that the US has put the Ukrainians under with regard to hitting oil refineries. I talked about this yesterday, and I was discussing why the US might do that. And I was talking in terms of international supply of oil and then refined oil products in the international marketplace, right? And lots of people were sort of challenging the idea that actually refined oil products would go out onto the international marketplace and actually they'd stay within Russia and be used by their own forces and people, etc., etc. But of course, if you stop refined products from going to the domestic population and the army in Russia because you hit the refineries, then Russians will have to go to the international marketplace to buy that stuff to bring it in. So it does, either way, it's going to affect global supply and therefore, demand of that global supply, which will affect prices and will affect inflation. So I think either way, the rationale for the US putting pressure on Ukraine to stop doing this is going to be one that has its basis in economics. The oil refineries in Russia that have been attacked by Ukraine are absolutely legitimate targets from a military point of view. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Ola Stefanishina said, and yeah, that I think they are a bona fide legitimate military target, but it doesn't stop them also having an effect on inflation and energy supply around the world. But last night, after a few nights of not attacking the refineries, we saw the Ukrainians pick up their project again. Overnight, Ukraine attacked the Kuybishevsky oil refinery in the Samara region of Russia. The refinery is specialized in the production of jet fuel, among other products. The fire lasted until the morning. The refinery is 900 kilometers from Ukraine's border. And actually, Noel Reports goes on to say there are two oil refineries close to each other in this area. This attack is carried out on the oil refinery which wasn't hit previously. Indeed, after a 6-day break, says Jen Kiev, Russian oil refineries continue to explode. Of the two refineries struck last night, the most spectacular was the Kubyshev refinery in Samara, so that's the one I just mentioned, struck multiple times by Ukrainian drones. 9 hours later, the fires have still not been extinguished. And here, Special Kirson Kat says, after a short pause, drone strikes on Russian oil refineries have resumed. Again, that one that's 900 kilometers away. Russian media claim that columns are on fire. That Kubyshev oil refinery is one of the largest enterprises in the oil industry in the Samara region. The refinery's design capacity is 7 million tons of oil per year. And the range of products produced by it includes more than 20 types of petroleum products, and main ones gasoline and diesel fuel. And the two oil refineries are located just 10 kilometers apart. Therefore, at first there was confusion about which refinery was hit. I guess both of them were hit. The Russian oil refinery, the Kubyshev one in Samara, is continuing to burn in the morning. I don't know if it's still burning, but 10 a.m. local time, there's still smoke rising from there. So serious strike there. Now, Ilya Ponomarenko, the former journalist for the Kyiv Independent, says, so given all the fuss over ongoing Ukrainian strikes on Russian petroleum refineries, the Kremlin is putting insane pressure on the US administration. I'm pretty sure that Russians via their unofficial back channels yelled the same old magic words like escalation, retaliation and nukes, and vowed to stir up troubles in the global oil and gas market amid US presidential campaign. And of course, it's been easier to just twist Ukraine's arm and absurdly demand that it doesn't strike the Russian oil refining industry, an essential part of the Kremlin's war economy, even with weapons of Ukraine's own making. This only means Ukrainian drones are now really hitting where it hurts, especially given the fact that Russia urgently halted all gas exports and that, for instance, large Indian refineries now decline to work with Russian crude oil due to sanctions. It's also quite possible that the recent large-scale missile attack on the Ukraine civilian infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, was again an act of retaliation for the painful drone attacks. As of now, we have at least 11 Russian refineries damaged or knocked out of operation by Ukrainian strikes all across the Russians' European area. Given the fact that the last strike took place just last night at the Novokubishevsky oil refinery in Samara, Ukraine probably respectfully declined to keep the Kremlin's precious oil pleasantly fine and safe. Now keep watching the Kremlin's war money burn, he says. So that's his analysis, the pressure coming from the US, and that would be an economic pressure that they would be potentially feeling. Russia strikes Ukraine's energy infrastructure. This is what the Euromaidan press are stating. So that big attack on the hydroelectric dam, which I think 8 missiles in total was sent at that. There are claims that it wouldn't be that the Russians thought that would cripple the dam it would cripple it, but not fundamentally destroy it such that it flooded. You would need hundreds and hundreds of those types of missiles in order to do that. But it does cripple it so it can't actually produce electricity by hitting like floodgate doors and so on and so forth. The Euromaidan press says this attack that took place 2 nights ago was to try to collapse the energy grid, and in so doing, stall efforts to rapidly expand Ukraine's defense production capabilities. So this wasn't about denying the public energy, but this was about denying the defense military-industrial complex that is ramping up inside Ukraine, the ability to make the products. So Russia must be looking at all this activity going on with the defense industry in Ukraine and the support it's getting from outside entities and say, right, okay, it might be too difficult for us to blow up those factories because of X, Y, and Z, and they're too far away and the air defenses are too good around them. But we can certainly still hit the energy facilities, substations, or the actual production facilities. And that will stop those factories from working. So there you go. That functionally has the same effect. Russia's average daily oil refining rate has fallen to the lowest weekly level in 10 months after a flurry of Ukrainian drone attacks hit several major facilities, according to Bloomberg. That's down more than 400,000 barrels a day from the average for the first 13 days of the month. So that is a challenge for the Russians, of course. And then the latest defence intelligence update from the UK Ministry of Defence says the following. On the 17th of March 2024, Ukrainian intelligence official reportedly stated that Ukraine had successfully struck 12 Russian oil refineries with drones. On the 15th to 16th of March, the Ukrainian media reported that 3 large refineries in the Samara Oblast in southern Russia were also attacked. And of course, that has then a week later happened last night as well. Some of the furthest facilities attacked are approximately 900 kilometers from Ukraine, underscoring the reach of the Ukrainian drone attacks. These strikes are imposing a financial cost on Russia, impacting the domestic fuel market. Recent strikes against refineries have likely disrupted at least 10% of Russia's refinery capacity. Depending on the extent of the damage, major repairs could take considerable time and expense. Sanctions are highly likely increasing the time and cost of sourcing replacement equipment. According to a Russian energy ministry official, there are plans to deploy Pantsir air defense systems to protect the refineries. However, given the size and scale of Russia's energy industry, it is unlikely that Russia will be able to protect all the vulnerable facilities. Absolutely. I mean, like I keep saying, it's that blanket analogy where the bed is too big for the blanket. There's not enough blanket to cover all of the areas, and as soon as you pull the blanket in one direction, it exposes another. That's the same. Where are you going to pull those Pantsir air defense systems from? You start placing them around all the oil refineries, and where were they previously? Because they are no longer going to be there, and then Ukraine can happily hit those other places that they were previously protecting. Right, moving on to other bits and pieces, and we're going to spend most of the time talking about the terrorist attack on Moscow last night. I did my breaking news update. It appears it was a terrorist attack. I'm not saying it was ISIS, but a terrorist attack. I think it had nothing to do with the Ukrainians, but the Russians are starting to try and attach blame to the Ukrainians in different ways. Anyway, Tim White here says, first I have to update what's happened, and it is happening in Russia following the terrorist attack near Moscow yesterday evening. Now, he says earlier on there were claims of 83 deaths, and now up to 150 is the claim that's going around. Then after the attack in this hall, this concert hall with attached shops and whatnot, kind of shopping mall as well. The roof was burning and I think collapsed. But anyway, last night the FSB released a traffic camera photo of a white Renault they believed was used by a terrorist to escape. And then into the morning, it became apparent that the car was stopped in Bryansk, which is on the border of Ukraine, but also the border of Belarus, and it was near Belarus. And apparently the car, well, there's some claims it had flipped and everything. It's reported from the scene that the car failed to stop at the roadblock in the village of Katsun. The car overturned. One was arrested on the spot, another a short time later, and the other 2 escaped. All the named suspects are from Tajikistan. A rather gruesome photo is being published of one of the 2 men arrested in Bryansk region. An assault rifle and this pistol were allegedly also found at the scene. I obviously can't show you that. And there's no doubt the attack at the concert hall and shopping mall has shaken all of Russia. It's the worst terrorist attack in the country since the Beslan siege almost 20 years ago, and that was highly controversial. Thousands of ordinary Muscovites have been coming to give blood since the incident. I'm not a conspiracy theorist by any means, but we need to apply critical thinking here. I've seen allegations of body bags moving and it was all an act. I dismiss this theory 100%. We saw people murdered. There are hundreds of witnesses, but now, but how and why needs attention. So there was something coming out with a body bag moving, which I saw as well. Don't know what that means. But nonetheless, it happened, and I don't think it was. There are lots of claims of it being a false flag, and there still is good rationale to suggest it's a false flag. I think it's probably a terrorist attack that can be very easily co-opted into having the same outcome as a false flag attack. So the Russians will be able to use this in the same way that they would use a false flag attack. ISIS or ISIL admitted it carried out the attack. The USA says this is credible. 2 weeks ago, Washington had given an urgent warning of a high probability of a terrorist attack in a crowded area in Russia, specifically mentioning concerts. Days ago, Putin called it blackmail. US intelligence is said to have shared some of the specific details with Russia of its intel, which Moscow publicly dismissed. Putin has been invisible so far. Surely any leader makes a fiery and defiant statement immediately. A live address last night was cancelled. Looking at how well armed the terrorists were, the way they carried it out, knowing the layout, starting the fire and escaped, shows this was a very well planned military style operation, and yet their getaway vehicle was a white Renault with Belarusian license plates. Despite the care and planning, did the terrorists really not think of having another car parked on a side road in the countryside to swap into? And with the Belarusian plates, they headed straight for the Belarusian border, and despite the roadblock, two of the gunmen escaped. The attack certainly showed Russia's weakness in defending itself. The US has intel, but not Moscow. Now, interestingly, there are lots of Russians complaining about this today. So there are people saying, how come the US had intel and we didn't? Like, what's going on there? So there's a little bit of anger from Russians themselves about that. And also sort of weirdly blaming the Americans for not giving them more intel. It's like, we'll come on to that in a little while. The US has intel, but not Moscow. Despite being told the risks of the Kremlin was still not able to protect its people. Yes, almost all Western nations have suffered terrible terrorist attacks too, but there have to be questions about how much the war in Ukraine is hurting Russia at home. Spetsnaz were quite slow to arrive, presumably from central Moscow, and the traffic's a nightmare there. Sending endless meat to the front line eventually compromises internal security. If someone wanted to humiliate and undermine Putin, this looks to have been a job well done. Obviously, he has tons of enemies, and after Syria and Chechnya, plus the open racism endemic in Russia, those sympathetic to IS are likely top of the list here. But don't discount internal interference in Russia. Many already made the comparison with the apartment bombings and Ryazan, which brought Putin to power. So, yeah, the previous bombings that we talked about and the false flag ones that Russia definitely did do that happened however long ago it was now. Could something similar bring him down? In fact, if you just put in Russian apartment bombings, I think there's a Wikipedia page. Yeah, 1999. That was it. And these were false flag ones that were to do with the Chechen. Kind of gave legitimacy, triggering a second Chechen war. The handling of the crisis by Putin, who was prime minister at the time, boosted his popularity greatly and helped him attain a presidency within a few months. Those were the ones I believe that were seen as false flag attacks. So don't discount that kind of approach. Putin, after the election win, pretends he's strong, but he is vulnerable. A slip of the tongue this week admitted the special operation in Ukraine is a war. Body bags are piling up. Relatives of the dead and the mobilized are not allowed home. Who are not allowed home are becoming increasingly angry, and a number of spoiled ballots, a huge turnout for noon against Putin, and the murder and funeral of Navalny have all been noted by any potential rival inside the Kremlin. Inflation is almost 8%, interest rate 16%, and the thriving economy, supposedly, is built solely on defence. Public services are cut, financial reserves are critically low, Putin is weak. Two more things to point out from the attack scene too. Who locked the fire doors to prevent people from escaping from the terrorist attack? Even something as small as this can cause outrage, a feeling of incompetence and corruption endemic in society. And whoever planned the attack horribly but strategically set fire to the upper levels. People were going to be trapped and burned alive or die of smoking inhalation. The body count will increase in the coming days, keeping the pressure and anger in Russia very high. So yeah, and there is lots of people inside Russia obviously shouting out about this and being angry about it, and rightly so. Right, a few things seem quite obvious at this point, says Anton Gerashchenko. Putin started his fifth term with a bloody terrorist attack, and most likely it will not be the last one. Russian forces special services either knew or were the actual organisers of the terrorist attack. Putin, for the sake of his goals, is ready to kill Russians in terrorist attacks, which he has done before. Women and children, people, many of whom were probably voted for him in the elections. American intelligence that issued a warning about the terrorist attack being in the making works effectively in Russia. The topic of votes falsifications during the election has been wiped off the agenda. Last morning's massive shelling of Ukraine, targeting Dnipro hydropower plant, Ukrainians that were killed and millions that were left without heat and electricity, all of that was pushed out of today's news agenda, and a number of victims of Putin's power is growing. That his power creates is growing every day. It is necessary to stop this bloody maniac. So far, the only real candidate for the job are the armed forces of Ukraine. Now, take all of these sort of claims and observations and where they lead with a pinch of salt. It's interesting that Hamas, I mean, this is a horrible irony, isn't it? The Hamas terrorist movement have condemned the terrorist attack on the Crocus City Hall and expressed condolences to the people of Russia. Wow. Yeah, and so we had that car that escaped. Then you've had the FSB saying the terrorists were allegedly did have links with Ukraine. It's reported they allegedly tried to cross the Russian-Ukrainian border and had contacts on the other side, on the Ukrainian side. Of course they're going to claim that. So here we have a headline. FSB, 4 participants in the terrorist attack in Crocus tried to escape to Ukraine. According to the FSB of Russia, the detainees had relevant contacts on the Ukrainian side. Well, yeah. And now it's generally accepted that 150 plus have died and many more injured. So it's a pretty horrific situation. And then finally, just without wanting to belabor the point too much, Anton Gerashchenko gives another analysis talking about some inconsistencies between official reports and eyewitness accounts. Millions of video surveillance cameras are installed in Moscow. At the same time, terrorists armed to the teeth are easily moving around the city in cars with fake license plates. Crocus had a contract with the Ukraina Federal State Unitary Enterprise and the National Guard, but the video from the lobby and other rooms where terrorists are shooting people shows no resistance from the guards. There are no guards among the dead or wounded either. Survivors report that the guards did not check bags and clothes before entering Crocus, and the metal detectors were turned off. So this is something that a lot of people are reporting. Of course, I can't definitely verify these claims. Even without taking into account warnings about possible terrorist attacks with foreign embassies, the Russian authorities are already constantly reporting about increased vigilance. Terrorists have a lead in the form of a car in which they arrived and about which everything is already known. It's reported that the very same white Renault with terrorists was detained in the Bryansk region on the way to the Ukrainian border. Why didn't the attackers change a car the whole country was looking for? Even if they were on their way to Ukraine, why go through Bryansk where the border zone is maximally fortified and protected? It is claimed that the building was set on fire using gasoline from canisters. Was it really enough for a fire of this magnitude in a building built to all fire safety requirements? Well, I'd say personally, if you're going to spread some gasoline around, it'll probably do a good job, irrespective of how many sprinklers are working. Why are there no signs of automatic fire extinguishing systems working? They were checked so thoroughly after the tragedy in Kemerovo's Vishnyaya shopping mall. Spetsnaz drove for over an hour, even though the Oman military base is 8 minutes from Crocus. The firefighters did not put out the fire before Spetsnaz arrived. Spetsnaz waited until they finished putting out the fire to start the assault, as if someone was interested in more casualties or the escape of terrorists. At the moment, it's reported that the number of victims has reached 143 people, and the video shows a completely collapsed dome of the Crocus City Hall concert venue. So, lots of people are going to talk about this and say that there are inconsistencies and weirdnesses, but you could probably find weirdnesses in most situations where a disaster happens. But also, some of these ideas are pretty plausible, that Russia had some kind of involvement or were opportunistically taking advantage of it or not. All of these are plausible in their own ways, and we'll try and pick our way through the data to come up with the most plausible explanation. While FSB is busy with torturing and killing Ukrainian civilians, kidnapping Ukrainian kids in occupied territories, they want others to do their job on countering international terrorist groups inside Russia. Ouch. So Live UA Map is talking about how Russian media, citing a source in security services, confirmed that US warned about the terror plot, but complained the US provided only general information and not details. It's like, so the US saying, oh, by the way, there's going to be a terrorist attack in Moscow at some point soon, and the Russians ignore that, and then when it comes to the terrorist attack, they say, oh, why don't you give us more information on that? I mean, God, what are you doing? And the Americans are like, A, it's your country, B, we're kind of your enemy, and C, stop pissing about murdering Ukrainians and do your own job in your own country, you numbnuts. Anyway, Serbian president had a National Security Council meeting today, so this is Vucic, where well within the sphere of influence of Russia after the terrorist attack in Russia. Now they will go after Russian opposition in Serbia. Of course they will, to completely silence them. This is how Serbian and Russian intelligence cooperate. It's just interesting. I'm going to go to someone's comments before doing my own little bit of research last night. It was really anecdotal, but it just confirms exactly this. Hi, sorry for my English, says Two Half here. I'm French and learned it by myself. Fun fact, you talk about the Russian troll farm in this video, so one of the videos I did, and here is something funny. Or not. I've just watched 2 or 3 YouTube videos by the AFP, so that's Agence France Presse, Le HuffPost, etc., about President Macron reacting about some homophobic remarks by the Russian government about our Prime Minister. So just to let you know, the new Prime Minister, the French Prime Minister, that young guy that had those drop mic moments that gave Marine Le Pen a right roasting and has been Slavo-Ukrainian, he's been fantastic, I think. He's gay, he's a young gay man, and as a result, of course, Russian troll farms are going to be absolutely going to town on that, as indeed, according to this guy, they have. In the comments section, you can find just one type of response bashing Macron. The fun fact is this. All the accounts are surname, name, random number, or user, letters, numbers. For those who don't know or don't pay attention, you may think that French people all hate Macron and it's actual foreign politics about Russia, but it's easy to spot the Russian troll farms if you know. Now, this is in response to what I said yesterday about how when Marjorie Taylor Greene says something, for example, or you can talk about any divisive political person, or indeed not even divisive, let's say, but Joe Biden says something, so many of the comments underneath you might think are Americans, because these are Americans. You might think they're Marjorie Taylor Greene's constituents or American citizens saying, this is amazing, yeah, we hate XYZ, or trashing Biden, or whatever it might be. But most of those people underneath are probably trolls from abroad. And so actually, if you're trying to get an idea of the general sense of American opinion to what, say, Marjorie Taylor Greene said or Joe Biden said, looking on places like Twitter or YouTube videos is not the greatest way of getting a sense of the real, in this case, Americans. But for your person here, it's France and Macron. And that then creates a false sense of reality. And as I said yesterday, based on what Jane Kiev was actually saying, where he said, these trolls don't vote. And what you might find is when it comes to the election time in November 2024, you have this opinion that the Americans all think that Marjorie Taylor Greene's wonderful and Biden's terrible because that's what you're reading. But these people don't get a vote because these are trolls. And the reality on the ground is that actually, not everyone agrees with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And do you know what? Quite a few people agree with Joe Biden, for example, right? Not interested in the reality of that, but the point is there's a difference between perception and reality. So this is exactly what Two Half is saying here, that all these claims on Macron's or on these videos that this person was looking at appear to be claims from Russian trolls or foreign trolls. Just another way to divide people and disinform those who don't pay attention. By the way, thanks for your good videos. They're always a pleasure to watch. Well, thank you. Thank you for A, watching, and B, for giving me, albeit an anecdote, a really useful anecdote, and something that definitely confirms or validates what I've been saying. And actually, last night, irrespective of that comment, I had been on... So I was just seeing how... The strikes were being reported. I was talking about the strikes on Ukraine yesterday, and then how the terrorist activities in Moscow are being reported. But here's just a BBC video on the strikes. And what was fascinating is I looked underneath to say, right, so what are... And this is kind of what Talaria was saying the other day in my live stream with her about the UN. We had a little bit on YouTube comments at the end. Now, this is sorted by... So it defaults to sort by top comments, which means the ones that have the most upvotes. So when you look underneath this video, of this BBC video of the Russian strikes on Ukraine, the first 50 comments are ones that have been upvoted the most, right? Broadly speaking, give or take. And then when you look at these, they are almost every single one is pro-Russian. So if this was a boxing match, the referee would have stopped it a long time ago. Trustworthy BBC and Telegraph claim that Ukraine took down every shovel. Because the joke is that there were these claims that the Russians were sending soldiers in with only shovels, and then Russians say, "Oh, look, if we've only got shovels, how have we done all this damage?" So took down every shovel Russia delivered, including hypersonic sticks too. So my question is, who did this to the winning side? In other words, taking the mickey out of the Ukrainians and bringing out the Russians. It's amazing how much damage Russian shovels can cause. All of the 200 upvotes. Don't blame Russia. You said Russian missiles are inaccurate. Also that Russia ran out of missiles. It must be someone else. West said Ukraine would win, but every missile and drone was shot down. The damage is from debris, laughy emoji, etc., etc. And this goes on and on and on. And again, this goes back to my previous point, that if you are a random and you look at the BBC News and piece here, and then just look at the comments, you just would think that everyone hates Ukraine and that you would just get sucked into this anti-Ukraine narrative because all the top comments are anti-Ukraine and pro-Russia. And that's because the troll farms are active on every single video that comes out all the time. I try and, with some of you moderators, try and get rid of these overt trolls because they are basically waging war. This is part of the information war. So I have no trouble with shutting these people down. They're no use to anyone because they're not involved in good faith dialogue. If this was someone that was saying something, put up for having a debate about this, and fine, let's have that debate. But this is someone who's paid to sow disinformation and is paid not to give a toss about what your argument back to them is. In fact, the more you argue with them, the greater the algorithm supports their commenting. And so it is absolutely horrendous how much purchase these trolls have everywhere. You look under every bit of mainstream media, and it might even be MSNBC or Fox News or whatever it is, CNN, and it might be to do with American news that's nothing to do with Russia, but there are Russian trolls there sowing division. Some of the most divisive comments you might think is from a hardcore MAGA activist, and it's not. It's from Ivan sitting in a desk in St. Petersburg. Just be really, really warned. Anyway, that's enough from me for today. I really appreciate the time you spend with me. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. It's been a long one. The final comment I'm going to say has nothing to do with anything. It's apropos to a book I've written, but thanks for this person. So this is Martin Elzen saying, "So JP, I just finished your book in which you totally demolished the KCA. The KCA, to those who don't know, in the philosophical world, is the Kalam cosmological argument. So he's just finished reading this book. Destroying the best argument is perhaps on the mean side. Mahaha. I love it. Now keep on pissing off the trolls. So if you want to get a bit philosophical about who started the universe and whether it was God or not, Countering William Lane Craig's Kalam cosmological argument, Did God Create the Universe from Nothing? By yours truly. And he loved that book, so it is a bit of a philosophical book. But there you go. You can go and grab that book, or any of the books I've written. I've written about a dozen books on whether or not God exists. And if that's what you're interested in, go for it, guys. Look Jonathan M.S. Pierce up, or my fiction books are under the name Johnny Pierce. So yeah, you can go for them too. Anyway, thanks guys. Take care. Speak soon.